Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about Gemini Fears, and yes, this does apply and pertain to the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. Well, anyway, people, first thing is what I look at as far as Gemini and their fears go. Well, the 12th house, because the 12th house is over that, and Taurus often falls on the 12th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. Now, one of the things I think Gemini expressing a strong love nature may be difficult for them. I think a lot of this is attributed to the fact that Gemini is like that mental motive type temperament and disposition. They just don't emphasize that strongly in their personality. They're often more about having that mental connection with somebody. Sensuality, a committed love situation. Gemini is often, they often have an aversion to being pinned down, whether it is physically or mentally or sometimes both. And I think a lot of it applies to love, because if they're in a situation where they're in a very persistent, committed love type situation, that means they have to stabilize and they can't have their variety, which, I mean, variety is often the spice of life for Gemini. So anyway, and also, it's also an expression, what they could fear is expressing that strong, steadfast and unbridled loyalty, because loyalty requires constancy. It's more of a connection with Taurus, but it's not so much with the zodiac sign Gemini. So anyway, and I think also such as like general stability, whether it's in love or what have you, that to Gemini can often equal boring and monotonous, and Gemini just does not really like that. Gemini can be very restless. They're very much about, you know, doing this and then doing that, and not really stabilizing and settling with one kind of one project or what have you. They just want to go to this and then go to that, and they tend to vacillate. So anyway. And also showing a placid and relaxed side can often be difficult for Gemini. Gemini is often very excitable and high-strung. And they're not ones, I mean, they like a lot of activity. And I think because of this, they're not ones that are really known to really relax for any protracted or prolonged period, which is really like the opposite of Taurus. So it's interesting. I have a little contradiction in my chart, because many of you may know I have Taurus rising, but my moon is in Gemini. So I think a Taurus rising definitely kind of suppresses a lot of that restlessness in the Gemini moon, and really, I mean, I come across really requiring that strong stability and tranquility in my life. So anyway, back to Gemini fears, and I think also it's about, keep in mind that Taurus, okay, being on the 12th house cusp and often in a solar or natal chart for Gemini, the moon is exalted in Taurus. Taurus could be a sign that could be, I mean, the moon is receptive. It's often very good. Taurus can often be very good listeners like Cancer. But for Gemini, this could be a fear in a way where they could be very averse to listening strongly, because Gemini, I mean, their thoughts are moving at such an accelerated rate. They're often finishing sentences that one will start. And they're just often very loquacious, very talkative, and they just don't have the time, that patience to actually sit there or stand there or what have you and really listen that much. They want to be doing the talking. Gemini, don't get me wrong, they could listen to some degree if an instruction's given, and they could assimilate a lot of information very quickly, but when they're in conversation, they're often the ones that are conversation dominators and not really known to be great listeners. So anyway, and often, I mean, too, that Gemini has a hard time. I mean, Taurus being on the 12th house cusp, often in the solar natal chart for Gemini, Taurus is a sign that's really more about being sedentary, stagnant, and mellow. And Gemini just likes, it can be very hyper and really likes to be mobile. They have a difficult time relaxing and sitting still for any prolonged period. Now, another thing, as far as possible fears for the zodiac sign Gemini, you look at their opposite sign, which is Sagittarius. And when you have your sign opposite of you, is often characteristics or what have you that you have also a difficulty in expressing because they're opposite nature of your own sign. And Sagittarius being opposite Gemini, being opposite sign of Gemini, well, I think what this reflects with Gemini is that, Sagittarius can often be very blunt, outspoken, and tactless, while Gemini, more or less, they kind of prefer often to say their own truth. Sometimes it has to do with not hurting one's feelings. They might stretch the truth a little bit. Maybe it just sounds better. But to others, they can often have the aversion of speaking that Sagittarius veritable like truth. And also, the sign Sagittarius is really strongly connected with the law. Now, most Geminis I don't think are going to be unlawful or unscrupulous or corrupt or what have you, but sometimes you'll see Geminis which will make their own law as opposed to going along with the law, because Gemini is somewhat kind of like Aquarius, like somewhat of a nonconformist, but Aquarius, it's more connected, I think, with just a general rebellion and wanting to be unique, while Gemini just feels like they just need to do it. Sometimes I think it might be a subconscious need to outmaneuver something, and in this case, sometimes it can be the system, so to speak. So anyway, now, also, I think when you look at that, another fear for Gemini and the fact that Sag is opposite Gemini, I think Gemini, at least subconsciously, sometimes they're averse to getting to the point, or has a fear of getting to the point. Gemini can ramble on excessively, sometimes without getting to a point, while Sagittarius, even though they're similar to Gemini in terms of being loquacious and sometimes downright garrulous, Sagittarius is more direct, speaking often with their harsh arrows of truth and veracity, while Gemini really, I think, takes a while to explain certain things because sometimes they're just trying to put it in a way where it's not necessarily going to hurt the other person. So, where it just might sound better. So, another thing is that what I want to get at is, as far as fears in Gemini go, well, when you look at the house cusp that Capricorn is on in a chart, well, that could show certain fears too, and where the person may be averse to or may evade, elude, or avoid. And Capricorn often falls on the 8th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. So I think what Gemini could fear because of this and have that restriction a lot of times is intimate and deep relationships. Gemini often prefers the superficial route, so to speak, in terms of their relationships. And also, 8th house connected with debt. And because of that, well, Gemini is not about things that are obligatory and that they have to do. It's like if something is owed, that could be something that's an anathema to Gemini. And I think a lot of it is connected with Capricorn often being on the 8th house cusp in a solar or natal chart for Gemini. And the thing too is that I find also the fact that the 8th house is over death, and with Capricorn on it, and often the solar natal chart for Gemini, well, I think a lot of this could be the fear of this. A lot of people can fear the death, but I think what happens is Gemini can fear it a lot more than a lot of people, because Gemini is just so vivacious and animated and just full of life. They just do not really, there's something about death that I think they tend, as far as the subject matter often goes, I think that just something many Gemini people can strongly avoid because of this. And also what's interesting too is that the 8th house is over sex, and with Capricorn often falling on the 8th house cusp in the solar natal chart for Gemini. I don't think Gemini is always like super fearful or in a state of trepidation over sex. I think a lot of Geminis can have a fairly strong sex urge like most people, regardless of their zodiac signs. But I think it's just something that they don't maybe emphasize as strong as the average person, because they are, as I stated before, about having a temperament that's very mentally motivated, and it's just not sex is often connected with a deeper connection, and Gemini is not as about that as much as a lot of other signs. So anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for Gemini Fears. Stay tuned next time, where I'll be talking about the zodiac sign Cancer and fears. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel, but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.